Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 340 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is James Patterson. He's the author of over 200 books, which have sold over 375 million copies, and he holds the Guinness World Record for the most #1 New York Times bestsellers. His Alex Cross series of detective thrillers have been adapted into feature films such as Kiss the Girls and Along Came a Spider, both starring Morgan Freeman. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new children's book, Max Einstein, The Genius Experiment, which he wrote with Chris Grabenstein, and his novel, The President is Missing, which he wrote with former President Bill Clinton. And now here's our interview with James Patterson. All right, so we're here with James Patterson. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, and so your new book is called Max Einstein, The Genius Experiment. So how'd this book come about?
Well, the Einstein estate wanted to hook up with a publisher and a writer who would make sure the kids around the world were familiar with Albert Einstein and his science. And I guess because they're Einstein people, they were smart, and they insisted that it had to be entertaining, or kids basically wouldn't read it, or if they read one book, they wouldn't read the follow-ups in the series. So they came to Disney and Scholastic, and then I have a small imprint at Little Brown, and they asked us all to talk to them about what would we do if we got it. And all they gave us was the name Max Einstein. And when we got together, I said, I know this isn't a big deal everywhere, but it is in a lot of places around the world, and even in the United States. I'd like to make Max a girl because still in a lot of places, including Silicon Valley, women, it isn't as easy for them to get jobs in science and math. And so I said, I think that's a good thing. I didn't know how they would feel about it, but they liked it a lot. And then I gave them, an example of how it might go. And I said, well, the first chapter might go something like this. Max is homeless in New York City, and she lives with a bunch of other homeless people. And you can tell right away that she's very smart and very into science. And she lives in a building where the bottom 2 floors are heated because there's horses are kept there, and the top 4 floors where the humans are kept are not heated, so it gets very cold in the winter. And she goes to some of the homeless people and she says, I'd like to, what I want to do is I want to get manure from the bottom 2 floors, and then I'll turn it into methane gas, and we'll heat the top 4 floors. So that's the way we start out, where it's cool storytelling, but it also has a little element of science to it. And, kids love sort of jokes about manure and things like that. So it gets them into it in a fun way. And that's the challenge in the series, to keep them involved as they're learning some things about Einstein and science. And I'm terrible at science, so that you're going to be able to trick me with any kind of science questions. Anyway, so that's how it starts.
Yeah, well, so then how about your co-author, Chris Grabenstein? How did he get involved?
He did nothing. I just put his name on it because Chris is great, and we've worked together now on about 10 children's books. We've known each other for, 30 years. We get along. The thing about partnerships, and I remember at one point I did a book with a Scandinavian, a very good mystery writer from Scandinavia, Lisa Markland. And, in the States, if you do a book, you're lucky if you get 1 or 2 interviews. When we did the book, I went over to Stockholm, and we had 49 interviews of people from all over Europe, and they really like to talk about books over in Europe. And one of the nice things about the European interviews is they ask different questions than the ones you get in the States, where they just keep repeating the same questions over and over and over again. But the one question that was sort of went across almost all of the interviewers was, how could a Swede and an American ever get along and cooperate on a book together? How could they collaborate? And what Lisa and I said was that basically there were 2 things. One, respect for the other person's work and who they are, and second, you listen. And that's true of the book I did with President Clinton, and it's true anytime when Chris and I work together. We have great respect for one another, and we listen. So Chris was very involved, as he has been, and we do Treasure Hunters and iFunny and a bunch of kids books, and I think we're both pretty proud of the product.
Well, I'll try not to repeat the same questions over and over again. So,
yeah, well,
is this the first interview you've done about Max Einstein?
No, there've been several, but all the same question. No, I'm kidding. Actually, there've been several around the world because the book, has been sold in a lot of countries already. Because, certainly book companies understand the importance of Einstein and kind of the uniqueness of, introducing Einstein and his theory to kids. I mean, it's sort of a funny idea, and somebody comes to you and you go, "We want you to introduce Einstein and his theories to small children, but just make it entertaining." And you go like, "Oh, okay." Maybe we can do that. I don't know.
So, I mean,
and the thing is, I mean, what Chris and I hoped to do was that for kids that don't, really know anything about Einstein, it would be, sort of a nice introduction. And, they'd walk away from book one probably knowing more about Einstein than their parents do. But for kids who are really into science, it would sort of stimulate them to find out a lot more about Einstein. So that's our hope.
So did you sort of make a list of Einstein's scientific concepts and then sort of connect the dots?
Well, it's a series, so we'll continue. We're gonna keep doing things. The second book is the manuscript's done. It's being edited right now at Little Brown. Second one goes to Ireland and then to India. Once again, just trying to solve problems around the world with science.
Right, and for readers, this first book, they travel to Africa to solve problems.
Yeah, well, first, Max gets introduced to this, kind of a mysterious thing. She gets called over to Israel, and she meets up with a lot of really smart kids, and they sort of have a contest to see, and whoever is sponsoring this thing believes that the hope of the future has to be children because they're not saddled with a lot of the self-doubts and fears and, worried about making mistakes and whatever. And so these are all very bright kids. And the way the contest is set up originally, just one of them will be, in the project, but it gets a little bit more complicated.
Right. And so this organization that Max goes to work for is called the Changemaker Institute. And This book has a very strong sort of attitude about motivating kids to get interested in science and take action and change the world.
Yeah, which is cool. I mean, look, I'm big on passion and getting people to believe in themselves and getting them to believe in the possibilities for change. I just gave a speech last night, and people were kind of saying, like, it's amazing how optimistic you are, especially in the current environment. And I go, yeah, I always have great hope for things. The program that I find the most interesting right now that I'm involved with, and it has to do with education. In Florida, where we spend about 9 or 10 months, the percentage of kids reading at grade level is 43%, which is pretty sad. But the best in the country is Massachusetts, and that's 62%. So that's even sadder because that means, well, around the country, nobody's doing terribly well in terms of getting kids to read at grade level, which should be, kind of basic. We have scholarships at the University of Florida, and so we have a nice relationship there. And I found out that they have a program they've been testing for 5 years, and they have numbers up in the mid-80s. In terms of, 84, 85% of kids with their program are reading at grade level. So my wife and I got involved with them, and in April of last year, we went to the state legislature here in Florida, met with the head of the Senate and the head of the House, and they looked at all the statistics, and they said, we'll give you 2 counties, and if you get good numbers, you don't have to get 80s, but if you get 60s or whatever, we'll take this program across the state. And it's just a win, 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 win. It's a win for the kids, and it will save lives, literally save, hundreds, maybe thousands of lives if we get kids to become competent readers so that they can go on with school and go to high school and, all that sort of thing. But there, once again, that's in that area of just optimism and hope, without being naive about things. And that's, obviously with Max and the Changemakers Institute, they have hope. They have hope that we can solve problems around the world. We'll see how it works out.
I mean, I don't really know what things are like in school now, but when I was in school, so many of the books that we were assigned were not interesting to me at all. And I wanted to read science fiction, like I think a lot of particularly boys want to read science fiction. And do you think that schools should be assigning more science fiction to get kids more interested in reading?
I think that schools should be assigning more books that are going to turn kids on. And unfortunately, it's gone the other way with Common Core, where it's just more reading that a lot of kids find irrelevant and turn off. English should be a real turn on class. And unfortunately, it comes down to, learning a lot of grammar and then way too often reading things that the kids have no interest in. I always think about, kids getting, having to read Shakespeare too early. And it's wrong. It's a turnoff. I mean, it just turns you off to Shakespeare rather than turning you on. If I was forced to teach Shakespeare to relatively young kids, I think I'd do something like, okay, everybody stand up on the seats of your desk. Everybody stand up. Now, you got to understand, back in the day when Shakespeare was around, in London, for whatever reason, everybody went to plays. And this was not true anywhere around the world. It wasn't true in Paris. It was only true in London. And plays were more popular than movies are now. I mean, just people went. But these people, the places where they went, they were loud and noisy, and there was a lot of drinking, and people were getting drunk, and there was a lot of things going on that we can't talk about in this classroom. But I want everybody to, we're going to, whatever it is, Macbeth or Hamlet, whatever, we're going to read this first page, and you're going to shout it out, everybody, because that's the scene in this bar room. It's huge, and people are kind of paying attention or not paying attention, so you need to shout it out. And so now we're starting to get a little interested in Shakespeare because we have a sort of a little context, And now you notice that on the smart boards or blackboards or wherever we have in the classroom, I've put all these words and phrases and, look at it's all covered all around the room. And they're like, well, what's the big deal? Well, all of those phrases, all of those words, Shakespeare invented them. He just literally made them up. He made up all those words. All those words you're seeing that you're familiar with, road, whatever, he literally made that word up. And something you should understand about words is every single word there is, somebody made it up. It didn't just pop from the sky. It didn't come down with the Ten Commandments. God didn't come down with the, million-word document. Some human being had to make up every word that you've ever spoken. So once again, we're just trying to turn the kids on and turn them on. And that's what needs to happen. I think is and unfortunately, governments are making it hard for teachers. Peering over their shoulders and forcing them to are force feeding too much into kids that they don't want to do. And certainly science fiction or regular fiction, there's just a lot of kinds of stories that kids will go, that was cool. I have, the imprint that I have, that Max Einstein, it's Jimmy books. And our mission is when a kid finishes a Jimmy book to say, please give me another book, as opposed to I don't like to read.
I mean, I heard you say that you weren't a big reader as a kid. And I was wondering,
No, I wasn't. I was a good student because I wanted to get out of Newburgh, New York. But I wasn't a big reader. And what turned me on, or where I turned on, my family moved to Massachusetts. I had no money. I needed to get money to go through college and whatever. And I started working in a mental institution, and I would work a lot of night shifts. And I would go into Cambridge 2 or 3, which was nearby in Massachusetts where my father had moved. And I would buy, 3 or 4 books, 3 or 4 times a week, and just, mostly in the night shifts. Generally, it was quiet. Occasionally, it would get a little rambunctious. And I just read, and some science fiction and some, a lot of fictional, plays, poetry, whatever. And that turned me on to reading and writing.
What
writing.
Science?
I started scribbling. Not a lot. I mean, Stranger in a Strange Land. I'm terrible if you sit down and go, like, what did you, but Heinlein, some Asimov. I don't, I'm not a major science fiction person, so I'm sorry to the science fiction people listening. I guess I probably like stuff that's a little bit more dumbed down science. So Stranger in a Strange Land is cool by me. Some of the stuff that gets a little bit more, not so much. Some of the movies I like. I've done light science fiction. I had a series, House of Robots, which got into light science as well. I was a kid living in Indiana. The mother taught at Notre Dame, and she would invent all these robots, and they'd have all these robots all over the house. And it was kind of humorous, but you learned a little bit about science too.
I mean, in your book, The President is Missing, one of the characters mentions A Canticle for Leibowitz. Is that a book that you like?
That's a book that the president likes.
Interesting.
He was a fan of that. Yeah, so that's how that got into the text.
Do you know?
And once again, as I said about Lisa and with the collaborations on Einstein, it does go back and forth between the two of us. So same with President Clinton, we went back and forth on pretty much everything.
Do you know of any other science fiction books that he likes?
I don't think it ever came up. I mean, there's a strong science element to The President is Missing because it's about cyber terrorism, and people who read that, I mean, it scares the shit out of people. But this isn't one of those you watch some of these movies, the White House is on fire or whatever, and there's some sort of a science element or Mission Impossible. But you kind of dismiss it when the movie's over, you go, oh, that was just a movie. In The President is Missing, what happens there in terms of cyber terrorism, it's very real. And the advantage that we had is that because of who he is, he could go to the best people in the country, and he did. And they talked to us about how that kind of terrorism could happen, that it is realistic. So it's scary stuff, and it's definitely science fiction in a political thriller.
Well, right. So a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Richard A. Clarke, and I asked him about that. He was describing the phone conversation I think that you guys had with him, sort of brainstorming about the cyber terrorism.
Yeah, no, right. Yes, he was one of the sources, absolutely, and probably the biggest source that we had. And the president and he are close. Of course, the president's kind of close to everybody. It's amazing to go touring with them. I mean, we'd always have these sessions where people could come up and say hello and whatever, and every other person he'd be hugging them like they were his first cousins, which is kind of cool.
So who are the other people that you consulted with in terms of the cyber technology?
Oh, I don't know.
Technology?
Yeah, I mean, but I can't. What's your name again? No, I'm awful about David Barr Kirby, but I forget names, and I don't retain. I have a huge IQ thing, but I don't retain information for some reason. I don't know why it is, but I guess I've never found it useful. So names and what did I read last week and, whatever. I know I'm reading a Doris Kearns novel, or not novel, but nonfiction right now, Leadership. And that's pretty good for me to remember.
Well, so you mentioned that the cyber terrorism in the book is really scary, and it certainly scared the heck out of me. What was that like, just writing about such a scary topic?
Well, I've written about scary things before, but serial killers and a lot of stuff, it's sort of made up. There's usually something that corresponds to it. In this case, I don't think people are aware how real the threats are, cyber terrorism, and you start thinking about burying some gold in the backyard or something in case one of these things actually happens. Because it's not just a case. And it isn't in the book, and it isn't in real life that, like the lights are going to go out for 6 hours. It's possible that the lights go out for months, that, all your bank records are gone. So there's no record of where your money is or was. All your medical records are gone. Basically, they just erase everything that there is. And we have to kind of reconstruct the society again. Clearly there would be another depression. One of the things that maybe safeguards us a little bit is, and we deal with it in the book, is it's not in any country's advantage for the United States to go down. Because if we go down, everybody goes down pretty much in terms of the world economy. And so, Europe, Russia, China, everybody's in trouble if the United States gets hit by a serious cyber attack.
But so you haven't actually buried any gold in the backyard yet?
No, and I don't want people digging up my damn backyard. No, there's no gold back there, I swear.
Because I've heard about, for example, the Walton family, the Walmart heirs, apparently built some giant underground bunker in case civilization collapses. They can all just go down there.
Well, there's a bunker. It wasn't Trump's property in Palm Beach. It was there before he bought it, but there's an underground. It was actually built during the Kennedy era when the Kennedys were all down in this area, and there's an underground bunker right on that property. And I guess some billionaires have done that kind of thing, and people who aren't billionaires have built stuff under their houses and whatever. I don't know if they're protected. It reminds me, when I was a kid, there was all the threats of A bombs and H bombs and whatever, and they would do the crazy thing, and you do it a couple times a week where the sirens would go off and you'd have to duck under your desk like that was going to protect you.
Right, but so you haven't built anything like that, or if you have, you're not going to.
Well, I have a desk. I'd go under the desk if there was I'm sitting right at my desk. I'd go right under there. No. It's silly stuff that's not going to really protect you and whatever. And what fun would it be? You come out and everybody's dead except for you. That's no good either. I don't want to be one of those, all those various last person on the earth. And invariably, somewhere in the story, you will meet the other person or little group of people, or I love that. What was that movie? The Quiet Ones, whatever the hell. That was pretty cool. This summer, yeah, that was really well done. I can't remember the actor, but he was in it and he directed it. It was really. I think he might have written it too. I'm not sure.
Yeah. John Krasinski is the director. Yeah.
Nice, very nice job.
Yeah. Do you think you ever might write any science fiction kind of stuff like that?
I've done light stuff. Humans Bow Down was kind of light science fiction. Toys, light science. Max Ride, which is actually my most popular YA book, Maximum Ride, about a bunch of kids who are experimented on in a lab and they're given wings, which I interviewed about 50 scientists about it, and they said, no, we could put wings on humans. It'd be tricky and it'd be a mess, but it's doable. So then I took liberties, and they're kind of retractable wings, which was kind of fun, not realistic but fun. And it was developed in Hollywood about 5 times. I don't know. Its time may be past. I don't know. Netflix, claims that they're still interested. We'll see what happens there. But it's very, very popular. And interestingly, for me, just in terms of the power your art can have on people. And I was at a YA festival in Charleston a few weeks ago. And I was amazed at how many of these teenagers were huge fans of Maximum Ride. I was there to promote another author's book, another one of the Jimmy authors. But we had a big thing, and there were about 700 people. And most of them, and we haven't published a Maximum Ride book in 6 or 7 years, but they were all huge fans. And this one girl came up, and she was probably late teens, maybe 17, 18, whatever. And she said to me, your Maximum Ride book saved my life. And, I thanked her. I said, that's really nice. And she said, no, James, your books saved my life. And she said she was, it was on opioids and whatever, and started reading Maximum Ride, and it really helped her to come out of and get past that in her life. And she said she was on her way to dying. Which is amazing when you get those kinds of stories. I will get, thousands of times, letters, emails, and then in person, where people say that, my kids' books got their kids reading. And, for parents, that's kind of devastating if your kids, won't or can't read. And then if somehow they turn the corner, it's amazing thing for people.
Are there any other specific stories you remember about readers telling you about some strong reaction they had to one of your books?
Yeah. I mean, I've dozens of times I've had people talk about, when a relative was dying and they would sit there and read my books to them, which is, touching. I mean, it's very sad, but also very touching. I've had people talk about people burying my books with relatives who, really liked what I did, which is also a little strange, but also very touching. I did a signing in Kentucky once, and, it was a good long line, and a woman came up and, kind of attractive, and, and she started crying. And I'm like, oh my God, what's the matter? And she said, I just have to tell you this, kind of a little bit of a confession. And she said, I had never read a single book in my life until I read one of the Alice Cross books, Along Came a Spider. And she said that just turned me on to reading. And even though it was difficult in the beginning for me to read a whole book, and she says, for the last 4, 5, 6 years, I read every single day, and I love it, and that's why I'm crying, which was kind of amazing thing to have happen to you, and to feel that you did some good.
Yeah, wow. I mean, you've been going around, I guess, with Bill Clinton touring for The President is Missing. What sorts of responses to this book have you been getting?
Pretty much great. I mean, it's the negative side of it are people who seem to get political about anything. The book is not political. I mean, there's one speech at the end that's a little political, but I think it's the kind of thing nobody should really object to. It basically just says, listen to the other side. But the rest of the book isn't political at all. And but you'll get people that insist on making everything that way, and how can you? We did a signing about a week ago, and we're all leaving after the signing, and there was 5 or 6 protesters, and they're just shaking their fingers at like the car I was in, going, shame, shame, shame. I'm going like, what, are you kidding? I mean, why would I be ashamed? I'm out here with a person. It was a president of the United States. He left office with the highest ratings of approval ratings of any president, and since they've been keeping those kinds of records. So I'm not going to get too ashamed about that. There was the Monica Lewinsky thing, which is not his proudest moment. But and a lot of times, it's really conservative people go, look, he's not the devil. Let's stop with that. You can believe in big government or little government, and that's a valid argument to have. But don't be thinking that these people are devils. And I'll say, well, the Bush family people, they're good people, right? And they go, yeah, they're good people. No, and they're pretty smart. Yeah, they're pretty smart. Well, they love the Clintons. So the Clintons can't be devils, can they? And and similarly to the other side, you go, well, the Clintons love the Bushes, so they're not devils either. And if people could just get a little more sane about stuff and go like, I believe in big government or I believe in small government. Okay, there's valid, reasons to believe the other way, and let's try to work it out and then compromise. When did compromise become a dirty word? I mean, we compromise with our kids, we compromise with our spouses, we compromise all the time. Why all of a sudden are we going, well, no compromise? Seriously? We have a disagreement. We have 2 ways to go. Let's kind of meet in the middle and move forward, I think. I don't know. That's me.
Yeah. Well,
I guess that's sort of like science fiction these days. Compromise? That's crazy. That'll never happen.
Right, because I'm pretty liberal, and most people are in the circles I move in science and literature and so on. But my girlfriend's family, most of them are very conservative, and so I've gotten to know them, and I mean they're good people, and it's really bothering me how people talk on social media. All my friends will just talk about conservatives and just in this very hyperbolic, paranoid
it's crazy.
Sort of way.
Yeah. But both sides do it, which you go back and forth, between CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and it's like three totally different, truths. I remember years ago I had a procedure in a doctor's office, and about a month later I was at another doctor's, and he said, "Geez, what happened in that doctor's office? He could have killed you in the office." So I now knew that one of them was totally freaking crazy, but I didn't know which one. And that's kind of the way it is when you're watching the various, TV stations. That somebody's probably crazy, but you're not sure who it is.
I mean, one line that kind of jumped out at me in The President is Missing is the protagonist, who's the president. He describes the press as emboldened and ravenous. I was just curious, do you agree with that characterization?
I think that at times they don't really do their job. They don't dig deep enough. I think when you look across at a news story and everybody has the same footage and everybody is saying the same things about let's say a disaster or something, you kind of question it. I always question, sort of a lack of an imagination. In terms of, you get a story and you can think of, half a dozen angles that, especially if you're going to cover the thing for days and days and days, that you'd want to dig into what about this, what about that, what about this, what about that. And they don't seem to do that very much with a lot of these stories and that kind of. So I think they could do a better job sometimes. I think it's become hard for them to do a better job because the manpower, the man and woman power, it keeps getting cut back. So that makes it harder. I think it's harder to put out a great newspaper than it used to be. And the smaller the newspaper, the harder it gets. So I also think that, and I think this has probably always been true, that, various papers have real political bents one way or the other. And I don't think this used to happen as much as it does, but you'll see even, important newspapers especially like the New York Times, you'll see people editorializing on front page stories. And that to me is sort of, obviously it's now considered to be fine, but it always strikes me as odd that you'd be editorializing on the front page of a newspaper. I would think that should go on an editorial page. And that's one of the things I think that confuses people also when they watch some of these, news shows where, when I was growing up, they would try to do a better job of separating out what was editorial and what was, as far as they could tell, factual. And now, on a lot of the radio shows and some of the TV shows, they're editorializing like crazy, and that allows them to sort of make things up or, put out half-truths or put rumors out there as though they're fact. And, it's kind of a dangerous thing. And my generation, they're used to if it's on the TV, it has to be factual, or if Rush Limbaugh says it must be factual, and not really. Because it's editorial, and a lot of these places they can sit there and they can quote certain people but that's just the person they're quoting. It's just their point of view or something they think they see. At any rate, so it's as you've been saying, or as you read these various things that your friends put up. It is a crazy time.
Well, right, and it's fine.
It gets harder, by the way. It gets harder to write fiction. Even science fiction up to a point. Given the chaos of the world right now, nonfiction is it's so fantastical that it's hard to imagine something that it's hard to get your imagination going beyond what's already happening in the world.
Right, and I think editorializing to a point is fine. Like we were saying, Max Einstein has a point of view that it's coming from, but it's just this stoking outrage.
Just don't say that it's news. Just say here's my opinion, whatever the heck it is. Yeah, Max. Look. It's obviously a fantasy. The idea that kids literally are going to save the world, not likely, but it's a cool thing and it's stimulating to kids. We are involved with there's an art school down here where we are, and we help them put on their one of the music things in front of a very large audience, like 2,500 people. And invariably, when we'll invite people, they'll be like, "Oh, seriously, a high school concert?" But it's they're so good, and it's so stimulating to kids to see kids that are that good at it, kids that are in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and it's like it's as good as you would hear in Lincoln Center. And it's really stimulating for kids to see things go like, "Oh my God, I mean, I could really do some terrific things." Yeah, you can really do some terrific things if you have some hope and you try. I mean, I have a series called iFunny for kids, and it's about a kid who wants to be a stand-up comedian. I don't like to lecture at kids, and I never do. But one of the things with that book is that, or with the series of books, is if you want to do something, you kind of really have to dig in and learn about it. And this kid in the book, he wants to be a stand-up comedian, and so he starts reading everything he can about stand-up comedians, and then he starts memorizing, and then he starts writing his own material. And that's kind of what you have to do. I mean, whatever you want to be, for the most part, you have to really work at it. And the thing about the kid in iFunny is he can never be you find out in like the second or third chapter, he can never be a stand-up comedian because he actually is in a wheelchair. And so a little piece of it is also how humor helps us to get past bumps in the road. Living your life in a wheelchair, which is more than a bump, but it's a significant thing, and some people deal with it better than others, and humor helps.
How about this thing in Max Einstein where Max gets this idea to put solar powers on the turbine blades of a windmill? Is that a real thing, or is that sort of whimsical?
It's directionally real. I mean, we try to do everything we put in yes, that could work. Now, can it work all across Africa? Don't know about that. Could be a little more complicated. We try to do things. I mean, what happens in Africa is she and her group, they go to a small village, and the idea is if they can make it work for that village, that in theory you could make it work for a lot of villages. And in this case, it has to do with bringing electricity to places where there isn't any or isn't much electricity. And when we go to India in the second book, it has to do with making water supply safe to drink in places where it isn't. And that's a huge problem in a lot of places around the world. Water shortages, and also, water being really impure and being very dangerous to drink. India being one place where that's very prevalent.
Right. I was also just sort of curious. I mean, this book has blurbs from Mayim Bialik and Chelsea Clinton. I was just curious if you know them at all or have interacted with them at all.
I know Chelsea a little bit. We put it out to a few people, and they were nice enough to come back and understand that the idea of getting kids involved with the science of Einstein would be an important and useful thing. But I think it is. I mean, I think, you mentioned the importance of science fiction, and I don't know how true it is now, but it certainly used to be true. Almost a ton of the important scientists around the world, if you talk to them, you say, well, how did it all start? And they go, I read a lot of science fiction as a kid, and it turned me on. It got me going. It got me thinking about science. And sometimes I just had a great teacher, or my parents were really involved in science. But a lot of times it was, reading science fiction really got them excited about the possibilities for science and the possibilities of their becoming scientists.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, my parents are both scientists, and they got into it from reading science fiction. And certainly most scientists that I've talked to are big science fiction fans. So I definitely think there's a big feedback loop there. Yep.
So that's a useful thing. My science just isn't sharp enough to go too deep, but I go shallow. And the nice thing about the Einstein book, because we're talking about kids, sort of 7 to 12, I don't have to go too deep. At least, as I said, in terms of turning the kids, some of them on, and then some of them will dig deeper because they got excited about Einstein.
I mean, did you need to do any research for the book on science or on Einstein's life and stuff?
Yeah, I did some of it, and then we have one fellow who works with us a little bit out of Chicago, and he's pretty good at laying stuff out in ways that Chris and I can understand what the hell it means.
I mean, is there anything you found out about Einstein that surprised you or that sticks out in your mind?
Not really. Because I read. Was it called Genius? Whatever. I know the TV show. I saw the TV show on Discovery Channel, but also read. What the hell is his name?
Was it Walter Isaacson?
The book it's out in the last couple of years. I'd read that, so I was semi familiar with Einstein.
Yeah, I really liked that TV show. Did you like it?
Yeah. And I'm hoping at some point, we can get something done on film with Max Einstein. We have, with The President Is Missing, Showtime bought it, before it came out, and we just got the fellow who wrote and directed the last two Mission Impossibles. He's going to be, and then another writer who did. I forget what he did. He Invictus, which was about soccer down in South Africa when they won the.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of good writers. So I'm hopeful about that project. Being a really good TV series based on the book.
I mean, in that show, there was stuff like that Einstein had a lover who was an attractive Russian spy. And I was like, wait, is this real? And it is.
Oh, yeah, no, he was an out there human being. I mean, he definitely, and clearly, I don't know that, his, the way he dealt with women was exemplary, but it bothers me when we sit there and we think we figured something out at our age, and then we want to go back and criticize everybody along the way because they hadn't figured it out the way we have figured it out. But 50 years from now, people will look back at what we think we figured out and laugh and make fun of what we're the way we're living our lives now. But I ran into it obviously with President Clinton, at NBC, where they got into the whole Lewinsky thing again. And, at a certain point, you just want to go, look, I mean, it was 30 years to go. And, the president has apologized for that. And since then, he's done a lot of great things. And, to some extent, I mean, whatever the audience is, I kind of defy anyone to get up and demonstrate that they've done more good for the world than either he or Hillary have done. They really have done a lot of good things. Which doesn't mean they're perfect human beings, and it doesn't excuse things, but they have done a lot of good things. And I think they're basically very good human beings. And I know the Bushes, and I think they're good human beings. So I just agreed to go to a celebration. Barbara Bush had her literacy program. And so I'm going to the 25th anniversary of her literacy program, which I think is great. Actually, years ago, I got a letter, and I was reading it, and this guy said, I picked up your latest book in Chicago Airport, and I'm a big fan, and I keep book plates. Would you mind, signing my book plate? And then at the bottom it goes George Bush, and it was George Bush Sr. So, I've spent some time with the Bushes, obviously spent some time with the Clintons, which has been, terrific. I've been out to dinner, actually up in your neighborhood there with the Clintons a few times. And, they're delightful to hang out with. So Hillary is warm and very down to earth, and just a sweetheart to sit with in a small table. I never thought she was great on television, but in a small group, she's just spectacular. Smart, but not in that showy, obnoxious way, and just a delight to be with.
Well, what you were saying about how the values of the past are different from the values of the present and the values of the future will be different. I mean, that's certainly a major preoccupation of science fiction. And one of my pet peeves is how a story could be set 300 years in the future and the people think and act exactly the way that people today do. I think that Star Trek is one of the best examples of trying to actually predict a society that's different and improved.
You mean the best at avoiding that problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, our son Jack, he's a much bigger science fiction person than I am, but he's definitely involved. He's watched all the Star Trek. He reads a fair amount of science fiction, and I never did quite as much, but he's done a lot. Is Kurt Vonnegut, does he count as humorous science fiction?
Yeah, I would certainly consider him science fiction. I mean, The Sirens of Titan. I can't see how you could say that's
I loved.
fiction.
I mean, that was another one. I mean, once again, it's I wouldn't not like a heavy dose of science fiction, but I always thought he was pretty wonderful. That certainly making fun of the different the craziness of our modern world.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what any of the science fiction that Jack has been reading is?
No, not off the top of my head. It's bad enough I can't remember what I'm reading. I definitely can't remember what Jack's been reading. But he does read quite a lot. He's a bright dude. He's up at Brown now, and the nice thing about that school is the culture there. Not every kid participates, but the culture is you're all bright. Don't beat each other up and support each other. And that's kind of not every kid, but that's kind of the way it is there. And the professors pretty much are that way too. They're just not into beating people up. My niece went to MIT, and she just said it was a horror show. And she got 2 medals at graduation, so she did well. But she just said it was just so unpleasant in so many ways. And then she went to medical school at Brown, and she said the difference was unbelievable, just in terms of what a nicer, better, more humane, for her anyway, experience Brown was versus what she had experienced as an undergraduate at MIT. And once again, that's one person, so I don't want to necessarily say MIT is, but there's a lot to be said for a good college environment that's sort of on the side of let's try to support one another.
Right. I also wanted to ask you, okay, so the cover flap for The President is Missing, it says that this book has details only a president could know. And I was just curious, what are some of those?
I think that's, obviously things about the White House, things about, there is a tunnel out of the White House, which a lot of people are not, most people aren't aware of it. It goes over by, you can go from the White House, I think it's out near the Treasury Department. He would all, there was a piece that I wrote about a president having to make a decision to get to go after a terrorist who would shield himself with his family, which, we've read about and I was curious about whether he would say, okay, that's, we're going to go after the guy. And he said, yeah, we're going to have to go after the guy. So you make stuff up when you write fiction. But in this case, you had somebody who would go, yep, that could happen, or you know what, that just wouldn't happen. I mean, in terms of the president going missing, that requires him getting, well, it doesn't require, but in most cases it would, getting the Secret Service to agree to back off and not protect him. And it's kind of debatable whether that's possible. If you got 10 lawyers in the room, 7 would say, yeah, probably the president could say, I don't want the Secret Service to, and they could, go off on their own. And 3 would say, no, you wouldn't be able to do it. So we went with the 7, and because it was important for the book called The President is Missing, that the president dumps his Secret Service protection. It also makes for a lot more interesting. And then once he had, you have things like the president in this book driving a car, and I asked him, I said, when was the last time you drove a car? And he had to think about it. I asked President Clinton. And he said, when Chelsea was learning how to drive down at Camp David, I taught her down there. And then he said, I was at one of the raceways, and they kind of let me go around in one of the cars once. And that's it. He doesn't drive anywhere. The Secret Service still drives him everywhere. And I've golfed with him a couple of times, and I let him drive the golf cart, and I'm putting my life in his hands because he's not the greatest driver. Yeah. But anyway, so there's a lot of stuff from sort of very mundane things Like, when was the last time you went shopping? Do you have any idea what anything costs anymore? When was the last time you bought a quart of milk? Okay, what does it cost now? Do you have any, you know what I mean? So very mundane things to, much heavier things like, okay, what happens if theoretically there's a traitor in the White House? What steps would actually be taken? What would it be like if a presidential, you've seen in the movies a motorcade gets attacked, but what would happen with the Secret Service? There are things in there and the other thing about it, one of the things that we tried to do over the last 20 or 30 years has been a lot of, joking about the presidency, Saturday Night Live, and then shows like Scandal and House of Cards and whatever. And that's all fine and good, except that people start actually thinking that the presidency is kind of a joke. And it isn't. It's the most powerful, the most important, the most stressful job in the world. It's unbelievably stressful. And I don't want to get political here, but we have to be really careful about who we consider putting in the White House. I think people have forgot that. They see some of these shows and they start confusing, Saturday Night Live with reality or House of Cards with reality. We don't have any presidents that would go out shooting somebody on the subway, subway tracks like House of Cards. And that was important to us to try to get people to see the presidency in terms of 4 unbelievably stressful days that could happen, and what it would be like to have that job. So that's another one. Only a president could kind of take you through those 4 days, and for it to be realistic. I could guess about it as a fiction writer. But I'd probably be wrong a lot.
One detail that sort of stood out to me is that there's this black tent that they go inside to have secure communications. Is that a real?
There's a lot of detail like that. Yes, yeah, and the president is off, and he meets with some other leaders, and once again, it's a secretive meeting, which is possible. That once again, it's rare, but it can happen. And you're right, they go into a black tent so there'd be totally secure communications.
I thought another point.
That's real. Yeah, everything in there is real. Everything that's in there, and President Clinton and I agreed that we weren't going to put anything in there that was just bullshit.
We mentioned that the stories about this devastating cyber attack, and it says in the book that there's actually a huge shortage of qualified cyber terrorism experts in the government, and that we need more of them?
Well, more than ever now, because I just read the fifth risk, and that deals with what an important time it is when you make a presidential transition, because essentially what's happening is like, here's a huge corporation, not as big as IBM, but a huge corporation, and suddenly in one day you turn over almost the whole company. It's all new people. Nobody knows. So it's so important that you've prepared for it and kind of know how to do it. So apparently, the Bush, because of a lot of experience, did a pretty good job of setting it up for Obama. Obama, because he thought he was doing it for Hillary, did a pretty good job of setting it up for Trump. But the Trump people were mostly unprepared, which is a very dangerous thing in terms of just having people. And to this day, just some of the people they have like running energy and whatever, you just go, really? That's, strange choice. So it's kind of scary now.
Well, yeah, like with what you were saying before, it seems like there is this increasing tendency to view the presidency as a reality TV show and vote in order to make a point.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, to make a point or make a statement or stick it to the other side rather than pick the person who is you honestly feel is the most qualified.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and it's a continuing problem. We'll see what happens here, but the one of the things that President Clinton and I talked about a fair amount is to succeed for the most part, I mean, to become the president, to have a chance of becoming the president, you need a story that people find compelling and useful to themselves, and you need a storyteller. And the Republicans had a story. Let's make America great again. And there's a wide swath there in terms of what does that mean. And then they had a storyteller who was good at telling that story. And the thing with the Democrats now, I don't know that they have a story, a coherent story about, and its story can't be like, let's get rid of President Trump. It has to be a story where people go, yeah, that's what I need to move my life forward, and I need the economy to be better, and I need healthcare to be better, and things like that, and in a believable way. And then a storyteller. Obviously President Clinton was a great storyteller. He had that ability to make his message very clear to people and compelling, and deal with them as a person speaking to other people. Reagan was a good storyteller. President Trump is a good storyteller for that particular message. So, and we'll see what the future brings. But I get nervous if they get up there with no story and no storyteller, because then I don't think I don't think there'll be any changes in terms of the next election.
Right. I sort of share that sentiment as a liberal. I mean, I think that the Democrats are in a good position to win against Trump in 2020 with a generic Democratic candidate, but it's not clear.
Well, the weird thing is, I mean, the statistics now are saying that Trump would lose an election, but that's against nobody.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
So when you put somebody in there, I think the numbers all change. When you actually have a Democratic candidate that people are going like, I don't know about that person.
No, exactly. I mean, if they could just run a generic candidate, I think that would be, they would probably win. But they need someone who can tell a story.
Fill in the name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I guess the last thing I want to ask you is that I saw an interview with you from a few years ago where you talked about you were working on a novel called The Store, which is sort of about an Amazon type company. I was wondering if if you're still working
on that. Done. That's out there. Yeah. That's you remember Ira Levine?
Yeah. Rosemary's Baby and
all that. It's that kind of tone, and it's where a company essentially is kind of taking over the world, and a couple of writers, as it turns out, married a couple, and they decide to write a book kind of exposing what's going on. And to do that, they have to go into this huge conglomerate, The Store, and expose it. And it's a very interesting read. Actually, at one point, M. Night Shyamalan, I don't know how to pronounce his name, he was interested in maybe taking it, as a movie. But I think it's interesting. I mean, I think science fiction readers would find it interesting.
Have you gotten any reaction from Jeff Bezos on it?
No, he kind of ignored it, which is fine. No reaction from Mr. Bezos on that one.
Because you've met him, you said, I think, right, that you were hoping that he would direct some of his resources into literacy.
The only thing, I mean, my real issue there was, please don't try to hurt publishers, because, maybe 20 years from now we won't need publishers, but right now we really do. If Ulysses came out and there were no publishers, it would go out on the internet and it would get like 5 ridiculously bad reviews and it would disappear. Or if Infinite Jest came out and it would get, 4, like incomprehensible, couldn't understand a word, and it's gone. So we need publishers right now to identify certain work, to bring people's attention to certain writing, et cetera. We really do need it, because right now that's not happening on the internet at all. I mean, I shouldn't say it at all, but mostly it's not happening on the internet. Certainly not on the level where it can reach, most Americans, or even a decent percentage of them.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So we're all out of time. So hopefully I got some questions in there that you haven't been asked a million times.
Absolutely. This is like talking to somebody in, Norway or something. No, it was great. It's terrific. Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting hour for me anyway.
Yeah, no, and definitely for me as well. So we've been speaking with James Patterson about these new books, Max Einstein, The Genius Experiment, and The President is Missing. So James, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to James Patterson for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Brian Tomasoni, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.